Hello, welcome to Classical Greek Latin. This is Greek lesson number 12 for Crosby and Schaeffer number 10, for chapter 10, Crosby and Schaeffer. And today we're going to be talking about the aorist tense, which is a pretty fun tense. So let's just get right into it. My name is Josh, and I am the teacher for this course. And let's get started. All right, so let's read the first passage, this little passage up here, as usual, just for fun. So, ho, ti kalon philon ae. A thing of beauty is a joy forever. And just a couple notes here. This is not the lesson, but kalon is where they're taking the word beauty from. Kalon does have the sense of beauty, but it fundamentally has the sense of what is good and therefore beautiful, right? You think of Clint Eastwood, the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? Bad and ugly, good and beautiful those were common associations in the ancient Greek mind. And then philon is, they say, a joy. This is the root for friend or kiss, something to love, right? To love or to like. Just joy. That's a fine translation. But yeah, that's just for fun. Let's jump into the aorist. All right, so the aorist, if you want to just skip to the lesson, just memorize these charts. All right. So that's really all it is. It's very similar to the imperfect as far as the augments and the inflections on the end. So if that's all you're interested in with learning Greek, go ahead and just memorize the charts you see here and follow the instructions. But I'm going to talk a little bit about the philosophy of tense and the aorist, because I find that interesting, and it is important to really understanding Greek from the inside out. So if you look at it's aorist, so that first alpha, this is a Greek word, aorist means a boundary stone. So aorist means without a boundary stone. So they tell you to translate the aorist as a simple past, not continuing in the past. So basically, if you could think of a football field with the stripes that tell you how many yards you have gone, and use those stripes or those markings on a football field to coincide with day to day, night to night, the rising of the sun, rising of the moon, setting in the stars, setting of the sun, moon, and stars, marking, and then hour by hour, minute by minute, marking the line from the past to the present. And the present is ever changing, right? The present is always moving into the past and always moving into the future. It's the eternal of the present, you could say. And then there's the future tense, right? So you have these lines on the football field telling you where things are at. Aorist is like a tense without those lines. So there's no reference point for the aorist. So we translate it in the past because the second it happens in the future, the second it happens in the present, it's already over. So it's non-continuing. So it's, of default, it's always going to be in the past. But essentially, this tense doesn't have a definite timestamp on it, if you will. So that's just something to think about there. So they give us two examples here. They give us the imperfect example, epauon, I was stopping, versus epausa, I stopped. Okay? Those are good translations. If you always just translate the aorist as a simple past tense like this, you're always going to be right. Okay? So note that let's talk about the augment real quick. So the aorist has an augment just like the imperfect. All right? You will notice as we learn more Greek, the bigger the augment becomes on the front of the word, the further back in the past it will go, as a rule of thumb, right? So you have epauson, right? I was stopping. And then when we get to the perfect, you're going to duplicate that first P as well, right? And then when you get to the pluperfect, more perfect, you're going to add an augment to the duplicated consonant. So what's happening here is the more phonetic content you put at the front of the word, that is, the more phonetics your mouth has to pronounce before you get to the root of the word, you could say the further in the past it gets. Okay, that's kind of a philosophical way of thinking about it. Okay, so another thing to point out is that the imperfect is built on the present stem, right? Or it's built on the first principle part. And let me pull out my handbook here. Okay, so the imperfect is going to be built on the present stem. Okay, so for example, let's look at an example here. We have the present tense, right? Luo, lues, lue. You have lu as the root of this word. This is the present tense, present stem, first principle part, right? This is going to be the first entry you see in the dictionary. Now, if we go to the imperfect here, all right, let me get this in focus for you. If we go to the imperfect, it's built, you still have the lu in the middle there as it was in the present tense. So it's still building on the first principle part, except you're tacking on the augment on the front and then inflecting the end with the secondary endings, right? So the aorist is going to build, the aorist is the third principle part. Let me go back to that page so you can see it. Okay, this is vertical. In the dictionary it's going to be horizontal, but you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 principal parts here. The aorist, which we're learning today, is the third principal part. Okay, but the aorist, just like the imperfect, will be built on the present stem or on the first principal part, unless it's a second aorist. Okay, then the root will change. So let me show you what I mean by that. All right, so Crosby and Schaeffer calls this a second aorist. Okay, so here's the first aorist. Let's just talk about this. Let me not get ahead of myself. So the aorist is simple. You're going to add an augment on the front, epsilon, smooth breathing, right? And you notice, if I can zoom in here, you have a smooth breathing mark, right? There, like an apostrophe, so it tells you it's not breathy, it's just it's not like an H, right? So just like the imperfect, augment the front with an epsilon. All the rules of joining vowels are the same here as they are for the imperfect. Vowels are the same regardless of what verb or tense they're being attached to. And then on the other side here, you're going to add sa, right? So I stopped, sas, you stopped, se, he or she stopped. So you notice it's very similar to the endings we've already seen before. So you have the sigma for second person singular, men, te, and then a nu here, right? So really the marker of the aorist is going to be your augment plus the sa, sigma alpha, except for third person singular, okay? And then you just add on your personal endings where it's appropriate, right? So memorize this chart. This is first aorist. This will be the most common aorist that you see. The second aorist is called second aorist because it uses secondary endings, okay? So if you remember, the imperfect uses secondary endings as well. On, es, omen, ete, on, right? So these endings are the same as the imperfect with the augment on the front. So you may be asking, how do you know the difference then between a second aorist and an imperfect? Okay, so the difference would be, let me write this out for you. Okay, so let's take the word elipon, okay? So in the dictionary, This is going to be lepo, like so. That's the first principal part. That's the present stem, okay? And let's see here. Then the future would be lepso. And then the aorist here is second aorist, so it's going to be elipon. All right, so those are the first three principal parts. That's how it looks in the dictionary, and we'll look at the actual dictionary entry for this. Okay, so you'll note here that this aorist form, so you have the present, future, aorist. Dictionary entries are always in that order. You note here that it's the root of the aorist form here is different than the root of the present first principal part. Okay, now Crosby and Schaeffer, they say that this is weakened to a single iota, but what really is happening here is that it's lengthened for the present stem. Okay, and we'll look at the dictionary here in a second. I'll prove that to you. All right, so let's do the imperfect, indicative, active, first, second, third person singular, and then we'll have our plural, and it's going to be first, second, third person plural. Okay, so we're going to take our root here from the present. Okay, this is imperfect, so it's going to be lep. We'll put that all the way through. Okay, so if I were to add the primary endings to this without the augment, of course, it would just be I leave behind, right? And so on. We want it to be imperfect, so it's going to be epsilon, augment, smooth breathing, augment, augment. So we're turning this into an imperfect, building it off the first principal part here. Okay, this is to show you the difference between the imperfect and the second aorist. Okay, and then you're going to add your endings here. So on, s, e, omen, ete, and then on. Okay, that's imperfect. So that's how you tell the difference from the second aorist here, which has the same endings and the same augment as the imperfect on, s, e, omen, ete, on, as the augment. That is second aorist and not imperfect, as you see here, because the root is different. This is the actual root of the word. So a better way to call the second aorist is fine, because it refers to the secondary endings. But it's more accurate and helpful for learning to call it the root aorist. Okay, so let's look this up in our trusty lexicon, our Liddell Scott Jones Oxford Greek lexicon here. Okay, so let's look at lepo. All right, so this is the word we just did in the imperfect. Okay, let's get the focus here. All right, I think that's good. All right, so if you look at lepo here, that's the first principal part, right? I leave behind, okay? And then you have your next principal part, which is the future, marked by the little F there. And then you have aorist number 2. So this is second aorist, okay? Now note here that this middle edition of Liddell Scott Jones lexicon is great because they give you the root of the word. So the root is lambda iota p, not lambda epsilon iota p. The root is lambda iota p, which is what we see in the aorist here. So it is a second aorist because it uses the secondary endings just like the imperfect, but it is more helpful in my view to call it a root aorist, because whenever you don't have the aorist using the sa, se, samen, sate, san with the alpha, which is the most common sigma alpha ending, and it's using these secondary endings, it's going to have the root being different from the present stem or the first principal part. So this is a root aorist, lambda iota p, lambda iota p. All right, let's look at luo. We'll compare this now. So LAPO has a second aorist or root aorist. Okay, it does not. A verb will only have one or the other. A verb will not have both the first aorist and the second or root aorist. It will have one or the other. Until you get into stuff like Septuagint, the Septuagint does not always follow the Greek rules. The Septuagint is the Greek Old Testament, but that's another story for another day. Okay, so let's look at luo, right? Luo means I loose, I destroy, that sort of thing. Like untying when you loosen your shoelaces, your shoe falls apart, right? It's destroyed, it's been loosened. Okay? Now note here, I love this lexicon. Luo here, the very first entry is all capital letters, all capital Greek letters, right? Lambda, upsilon, omega, luo. So when this edition of Liddell Scott Jones lexicon, this Oxford edition, has it in the capital, all capital letters, they're telling you that is the root. There's nothing beyond this word here. This is where it ends. So, and really the omega is part of the personal ending. So really the root of this word is lambda upsilon. So you have the present tense here, okay, first principal part. Then again, you have the future comes second, luso, right? And then the imperfect is going to be built on luo. But then you have aorist. You know, it says first aorist, right? And the root, lambda upsilon here, is the same as the first principal part, the present stem, okay? And then you see the sa ending. This first aorist is going to be the most common. Second aorist or root aorist is commonly used as well, but not quite as much as this one right here. So I hope that makes sense. But we're really getting into the meat of Greek at this point, which makes it a lot more fun in my mind. So, all right, where are we at here? So let's go back to Crosby Schaeffer. Let me get this out of the way. Okay, so we talked about that. Let's see here. All right. Oh, let's look at infinitives. All right. So, pausai. On the infinitives, there's no augment. Okay. And the accent is always going to be on the penult. Okay. If you notice when I was accenting the imperfect conjugation that I put together, I was moving that accent in a recessive manner so that to give it 3 more days, right? And if you need to review, you can go back and review that in previous lessons. But when you have an aorist infinitive, there's no augment, and the accent is always on the penult. Now, this particular word pausai only has 2 syllables, so it does not have an ante penult. It doesn't have a syllable before the penult, so it's not very easy to see, but if there had been a 3rd syllable here, that accent would still just be on this second from the last syllable. Okay, so the infinitive, no augment, and the accent is always on the second to last syllable. All right, and let's see here. So that's first aorist, second aorist. The accent is always going to be the last syllable. Okay, again, no augment. Okay, so the infinitive for neither the first or second aorist or root aorist has an augment. First aorist is always accented on the second to last syllable. And the root aorist, also known as the second aorist, is always accented on the last syllable. Okay, and you'll note that the phonetic ending on the infinitive ending here looks the same as the present infinitive, but it is not. And that's how you would tell the difference, right? Well, and also the vowel changes as well. Okay. But yeah, if you come across an infinitive that looks like a present, but the accent is on the end, it's aorist. All right. Not present. All right, let's see here. So formation of the aorist. The aorist is common with other secondary tenses, i.e., that is the imperfect, and the indicative has augment and secondary ending. We talked about that. Pretty straightforward. Okay. All right, let's go over here. All right. The distinguishing features of the first aorist is the suffix sa, se, and the third singular, which obeys the same phonetic laws as the se of the future. So what that is saying is that when the sigma is next to a p, for example, it would become psi. If it's next to a kappa, it would become xi, right? So we covered this when we talked about the future. The combination of consonants with the sigma is the same for the aorist as it is for the imperfect. And it's not that the imperfect and the aorist have this in common because they're aorist and imperfect. They have it in common because they, or excuse me, I said imperfect, I meant future. It's not that the future and aorist both have this phenomenon. It's that the sigma has this phenomenon, and the sigma is used in both the future and the aorist. So correction there. There's no sigma marker in the imperfect. All right. Sigma marker for the future, and then sigma marker for the aorist. Okay, and then the aorist, you have the augment and then the alpha added as well. All right, hope that makes sense. Put questions and comments below, and I will try to get to those as I can. All right, the first aorist infinitive active is always accented on the penult. Okay, so we saw that already. So they're giving us some more examples here. All right, these are good examples because, let me zoom in a little bit. These actually have a third syllable that theoretically could be accented. And you would expect that to be accented because alpha iota is considered short at the end of a word. But because this is an infinitive, you have that circumflex over that second to last syllable there. Okay, and it's a circumflex because alpha or omicron iota, even though it also is short at the end of a word, here it is in the middle. And therefore it is it's its natural self, it's long. So you can put a circumflex over it, okay? So we're still straining to get that 3 more rule, all right? So we're going to drag out the omicron iota diphthong as long as we can with that circumflex, right? But we're not going to put it further back than that, like on a normal verb, because we want to signify that this is an infinitive, right? And then here you have that alpha in the middle there is short, so it cannot take a circumflex. So we're stuck here. We got a short alpha iota on the end, and then we have a short alpha. But because it's infinitive, we can't put the accent back any further. So we're going to mark the penult or the second to last syllable there. All right. Okay. Let's see. Here's letter D. Sorry about that. Some verbs lack a first aorist. Such verbs often have a second aorist. This is what I call the root aorist. A distinguishing feature of which is a weakening of the vowel element of the stem. And I talked about this already. Crosby and Schaeffer, their knowledge of Greek is beyond mine, but I would disagree with them in how they word this here. I would say that with words that have a root aorist, that is, they have the actual root of the word in the aorist with secondary endings, that the present stem, the first principal part, is lengthened or strengthened, right? And the aorist is the indicator of the true root. That's why I like to call it the root aorist, okay? Let's see here. If it's helpful to you to think of this as Crosby and Schaeffer think of it, you're welcome to do so. I think thinking of the aorist, the second aorist as the root aorist, and the lengthening of that vowel for the present stem is more useful. But you may do as you choose. All right, going on. The second aorist indicative is inflected like the imperfect. We talked about that. And the corresponding infinitive has an ending like that of the present infinitive, but it is accented irregularly on the ultima, or the last syllable. Okay. And here, okay, what do we have here? Okay. So we have the present here, lepo. Then we have the root aorist here. Okay. And then we have the root aorist infinitive here. Okay. And then feugo. This is a good example here. Feugo, you have the present here. Efugon, your instinct would see that this is efugon, your instincts would say, oh, imperfect, right? Because you see the augment and you see the secondary ending there. But you have the root of the word here rather than the lengthened feugo versus fugo. And if you look this up in the lexicon with a good lexicon, it will give you the root of this word is not feug, it's fug. Okay? And then you have the second aorist infinitive here and no augment there. Okay? Okay, so let's see here. Letter E. The third form in the principal parts of a normal verb shows by the presence of sa or on. Okay? One or the other. You're not going to have both. Whether the aorist is first or second. Okay? First, second, or root aorist. All right? Okay, so they want you to inflect luo, feugo, in the aorist indicative and infinitive. Go ahead and do that on your own. That's good practice. All right, and let's see here. Number 56, there is usually no difference of meaning between first and second aorist. True. The terms signifying merely difference in formation. Yes, yeah, true. It's fun to think about why some words would use the root for the aorist and other words would use the present stem for the aorist. That's a fun thought experiment. But I won't do that right now for you. I'll let you do that on your own. Okay, so we have a pausa, first aorist, I stopped, and then elipon, root aorist, I left. Okay, versus the imperfect would be like I was leaving. Okay. Number 57, tenses of the infinitive. The infinitive, except in indirect discourse, has no time value. Okay. The present infinitive denotes continuance or repetition, a motion picture, while the aorist infinitive denotes a single occurrence, snapshot. A snapshot is a good way of thinking of the tense of an aorist, okay? And you really see the Aorist, the boundlessness, or the tense without a boundary to it. That really comes to the surface here in the infinitive form. It has no time value. Okay. All right. So again, we have some indirect discourses here. Ethele, he wishes. All right. This is the present tense. To keep on fleeing. Okay. Remember I talked about the aorist can happen in the present, but immediately stops and it does not continue with the present. So the second it happens, it's already in the past, right? Except here in the infinitive. Ethele fugain. So he wishes to flee. Okay. So there's really no time value here, where you have the aorist here. Okay. So two ways you know this is an aorist infinitive. Okay. Neither have an augment. This is present. This is aorist. Okay. Same phonetic ending. The aorist is accented on the last syllable on the ultima. And here it has the root, fug, and the present has the full, or you could say the extended version, feug. All right, and then the accent is on the, in this case, the penult, as you would expect it. Okay, that's that. Let's turn the page here. All right, we have some nice construction work done by Hadrian, or at least Hadrian's workers. Okay, you can check that out on your own. All right, let's look at vocabulary. All right, make sure there's nothing weird here. All right, and okay, so they give you here an example of a dictionary entry of the three principal parts that now we have learned. So you have present, future, an aorist, right? And think, is this first aorist or is this root aorist? This is root aorist, right? Because it has the actual root, not the expanded version of leib, okay? And then, of course, the imperfect is built off the present stem here, okay? And just as a refresher, this is the verb that I conjugated for you, okay? They say inflect. They call this inflecting. Inflecting just means to bend or to change the end, right? Conjugate means to join together. That is the augment the endings to the root. Okay. The point is we wrote it out in first, second, third person, both singular and plural. Right. This is imperfect. All right. Built off the present stem, which is this right here. Okay. And then we looked up, I believe we looked up luso. Yeah, luo in the dictionary. Yes, we did. And that gave us an example of the elusa, the sigma alpha inflections there. Okay. So you should be set to go. Let's see here. Nothing really strange here. Okay, you note here on your, this is your noun here, epistole. You have your eta, not an alpha, because the lambda is neither an epsilon, iota, or a rho, so you have your regular eta there. Same thing over here for loipos. This is, of course, connected to the lepo or leap word, and the vowels in the middle change to make it an adjective here. But again, you have eta there, not alpha, because you don't have epsilon, iota, or rho. You have a P there at the end of the root of the word. Okay, so let's see here. Oh, this is interesting. Toilopon, the future, the things remaining, I guess, is what that means. So another word for future in Greek is opiso, which means behind. And it was the idea that it's not behind you like you back into the future. It was the idea that you can't see the future. You can't see what's behind you. So a very interesting way of thinking there. But yeah, toloipon, the future. Yeah, the things remaining. Yeah, the thing remaining. The undone thing. And then let's see here. Okia, house. Yeah, get your word economy from this. And then, yeah, pule, gate, pylon. Okay, that's it. And as usual, we have the exercises here, just basic translation. All right, so work through that. I'll be posting the answers to that on our Patreon. The link for that is below. It's $10 a month. And I give you all the help you need for the exercises here. All right, and then again, Crosby and Schaeffer, very consistent here. You got your, just complete the words with the correct inflection, whether it be noun, adjective, or verb, okay, to make sense of that. And then here we got English to Greek, which is, I think, the hardest part, but very useful learning Greek. Okay, so take a look at all that, work on that, and then next week or next time we have review. This is our second review coming up, so we have that to look forward to. A little bit of reprieve there, let our minds catch up. But that's next lesson. Today's lesson was lesson 12 over Crosby and Schaeffer 10. The aorist, the famous aorist. So you will see a lot of aorist verbs. So hope that was helpful. Hope you found that enjoyable. Put any comments or questions below if you so desire, and I will get to those as I can. And again, if you're interested in getting help on the exercises, I do post the answers for those on our Patreon page, and that is $10 a month if you'd like to join. The link for that is in the description below. All right, thank you for joining us today. Have a good day, and I'll see you next time. Bye.